So that, in effect, here was a case where a philosopher, reflecting on what had to be, I mean, you had some good reasons for your materialism, could advance the truth in this area ahead of the laborers in the field, the neuroscientists who were looking at the neurons themselves.
Well, apparently so. Of course, you know the history of that as I don't. But surely back in '52, there were others, even scientists, who did see things pretty much this way. Well, of course, there were and had long since been John B. Watson and fairly long since B.F. Skinner. And I think this would chime in with them, their views.
Of course, a lot of the antipathy to this frankly materialistic view of consciousness was summed up by Ryle in The Concept of Mind in 1949 as the doctrine of the ghost and the machine, which he also criticized. And in the notorious first chapter of The Concept of Mind, Ryle says that it's a category mistake. He introduces this term of a category mistake to say that there's minds on the one hand and brains on the other hand. And he went to some length, not by anybody's standards successful length, of telling us what a category mistake is. But it has to do, he said, with different meanings of the word exist, different senses of existence. Now, you came along shortly thereafter with your doctrine that to be is to be the value of a bound variable. This was your way of treating the notion of existence. Do you see that your doctrine of to be is to be the value of a bound variable, was this an alternative to Ryle's idea about existence, or was it a way of rendering formal and clear what Ryle was groping for all along? What do you think?
No, certainly it wasn't in tune at all with Ryle's notion of categories. In fact, somewhere, perhaps in Word and Object, I came out against exactly that, namely Ryle's notion of there being different senses of existence. Where do we draw the line? And for me, there is simply a general idiom that applies all over the place. You would apply it to numbers and concrete objects, and all on equal footing. It's all a question of whether you're going to use them as well. One way of putting it as objects of relative pronouns, or the mathematical analog of those is the variable, the bound variable. When you say everything is thus and so, when I say it, I'm including numbers and everything there is, of course.
And when somebody else says what they think there is, somebody else speaks, and we can see what that person's ontology is. Suppose it doesn't agree with yours. Suppose there's a difference. Is there a final objective arbiter of what there is, of ontology, of what terms refer to? Can we solve that problem of metaphysics and say this is what there is?
I see it as a matter of the best, most satisfactory, clear, clean-cut, economical system we can set up that accommodates all of science as we see it, and I see it as changeable, revisable, like the rest of science. That it's just the question of what there is simply a part of science. Reality is a scientific term, as I think of it.
But one of your extensions or elaborations of your idea of the indeterminacy of radical translation is the idea of indeterminacy of reference. How can we tell if two people actually are agreeing in the reference of their
Very good. Yes, I'm glad you bring this up, because a nice thing about my doctrine of indeterminacy of reference is that, unlike my speculation on indeterminacy of radical translation of sentences, and that applies primarily to sentences, not words only derivatively, Indeterminacy or inscrutability of reference is trivial and is incontestable. And here's the consideration. Consider any one-to-one reinterpretation of everything that there is. For instance, if this is applying to, insofar as it applies to creatures, animals and other physical objects in the space-time, you might associate arbitrarily with each cat just the rest of the cosmos, minus the cat. Everything, the cosmic complement. And if you reinterpret all your nouns and verbs, all your predicates, as being true of the, as this case, of the cosmic complements, of the thing that they were true of, that we ordinarily think of them as true of, do that systematically, all the sentences still come out true, and all the scientific evidence for them comes out true, because take a sentence such as cats are carnivores. The reinterpretation makes those words, cats are carnivores, mean cosmic complements of cats are cosmic complements of carnivores. What's the difference? Those are equivalent. It's essential here that we say, as I did, one-to-one correspondence, which cosmic complement fulfills, because it isn't always that when you do this, you get correspondence. For instance, there are mothers of lawyers. Well, a man doesn't have to be a lawyer in order that the man's mother be the mother of a lawyer, because he may have siblings. It's in that way that this could break down. So it's essential to say one-to-one, but cosmic complements one-to-one, and all sorts of arbitrary correlations are just as good as others. So when we take this into consideration, I don't see what sense there is in wondering what somebody's talking about. We just take the simplest line and say, yes, he's talking about cats, not cosmic complements. Classes, everything. You can play the same game. And so what does it mean then? I mean, what's the point of ontology? What's the point of objects, talking about them? What's the point of quantification, bound variables? And my answer is, it introduces structure into the overall scientific theory. And that structure in the scientific theory is needed for the logical structure in order that the scientific theory imply observation sentences. And it's important now, observation sentences, not observation terms, because terms, that's a question of denoting objects. But observation sentences as wholes, which are conditioned to sensory input, and stay put, no matter how we reinterpret terms or values of variables. So when you consider the triviality of this little argument about cosmic complement, it's puzzling why people, including me, in the old days when I thought of ontology as being really the very heart and core of philosophy, why they take questions of identity of objects so seriously.
What would you say to an objector who maintained that this thesis of the inscrutability of reference, or indeterminacy of reference, isn't so much trivially true as trivially false, on the grounds that it is trivially true that, for example, the word quine refers to quine, and that is perfectly determinate and just as obvious as the analogous statement that you talked about earlier when we were talking about truth, namely that the sentence "snow is white" is true if and only if snow is white.
Yes, good. All right, now let's take that example. here we're reinterpreting all singular terms, all general terms, all verbs, and so on, systematically, say by cosmic complement again, so that word in quotation marks, Quine, that denotes my cosmic complement under the reinterpretation. We're reinterpreting that word, and also we're reinterpreting the word in the rest of the sentence after denotes or designates, likewise to refer to my cosmic complement. There is this, perhaps there's this point, perhaps I should try to clarify a little. That must cause some puzzlement. When I talk about cosmic complement of Quine, cosmic complement of a cat, or whatever, you're understanding me only because you understand the three words, cosmic, complement, and cat. And so you're still there using them as words. So what you have to think of in that phrase, cosmic complement of, you have to think of them as hyphenated words. These are just the component syllables now of the word, and not denotative words in turn. Because what I'm trying to convey here is not a reformulation of the language, but a conceptual reinterpretation of putting the whole thing now in the dangerously mentalistic way of your conceptual interpretation of these words. The written sentences stay unchanged.
The written sentences, which are sentences about reference, so sentences such as the word Quine refers to Quine, remains determinately true.
That's right.
And it's unclear then exactly how the thesis of that reference is indeterminate is to be articulated, since it seems as if we're agreeing that there are claims about reference that are determinately correct.
But it leaves the question open that it refers to Quine in what sense of Quine?
And in what sense it refers?
Yes, and perhaps worst of all, in what sense of sense, which is something I'm not quite clear on myself.
And in the history of philosophy, one long-running debate has been the debate between realism and anti-realism. So the realist says roughly that many aspects or most aspects of the world are independent of our ability to grasp or conceive or know about them. The anti-realist says that reality is in some way more mind-dependent. How would you place your philosophy on that spectrum?
Yes, good. Because I do think of myself, at least in one sense, as a naive realist, going along with the dictates of science and changing my mind when the scientists tell me to, and that's where reality lies. And real is a technical term of science, along with photon and the rest. On the other hand, how to reconcile that with the recognition that the very notion of object, which is brought, and I think this is brought out among other things by this matter of indeterminacy of reference, is just as a matter of a highly structured theory, which is pinned down only to testable reality only by implying these observation sentences, which are conditioned to the sensory input. So in what sense then is this subjective and brute fact and all? And I think that the brute fact just concentrates on that point now and is reduced to that point, and that the very notion of object, let alone photon or neutrino or whatever, the notion of object as such, or number or class, these are man-made, naturally. Certainly the terms are, and I think you can't go beyond. What saves this? What saves all this from being a pure coherent theory of truth, or what saves it again from being a pure idealism, is just that tenuous link with our neural input.
I wonder if I can help to locate the view even more precisely by asking you about a realist thesis that's been having some discussion recently. Sometimes people call it epistemic boundedness or cognitive closure. So the idea is this: we're evolved creatures. The price we pay for being good at some things is that we're pretty bad at other things. Maybe one of the things that we're bad at is grasping certain really very important aspects of reality. It could be, it would seem, then that some of the true story about some really important aspects of reality is just constitutively or constitutionally beyond our grasp. It might be, if we were really unlucky, that the true story about how we're able to be conscious or how we're able to act freely, something really important to us, is just something that we can't grasp because of how we've evolved. How do you feel about that doctrine?
This is where I'm hemmed in by my naturalism. And beyond our grasp, it may very well be beyond our grasp in the sense that there are these things that if we were more successful, we might get a hold on in our scientific efforts. But as a matter of fact, we never will. But it would be at that level. And of course, it's part of the proper attitude towards science is fallibilism. Fallibilism across the board. Incidentally, that means, of course, that naturalism itself is part of that, insofar as my naturalism is, as I claim, continuous with science. New avenues, conceivably, new avenues could open up where we would happily no longer be just dependent on this input through our five senses, but we also would get a telepathic avenue, for instance, or more fantastic still, somehow an avenue into the future. Well, I would stand corrected, and I'd be very happy about it, as a matter of fact.